The notification on Elena's phone didn't make a sound, but the sudden light on the bedside table was enough to wake Julian, revealing a message that shattered 10 years of marriage in a single glowing sentence. He watched her sleeping form, beautiful and deceptive, and in that cold, silent room, he decided not to wake her with screams, but to cover her with a blanket of false security. There is a terrifying power in the things we leave unsaid, and a unique tragedy in believing we have been forgiven when judgment has only just begun. If you find yourself drawn to the quiet, devastating storms that rage behind closed doors, stay with me. There are layers to this silence we have yet to uncover. The rain in Chicago had a way of turning the city into a blur of gray steel and smeared neon, a visual echo of how Julian Thorne felt as he stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of his 42nd floor office. It was 8 p.m. on a Tuesday. The blueprints for the erratic Riverside complex were spread out on the mahogany desk behind him, but the architecture that occupied his mind was far more domestic and far more unstable. His phone sat on the edge of the desk, screen dark, but the image it had displayed an hour ago was burned into his retinas. It wasn't a sorted photograph. It was a screenshot of a text thread synced inadvertently to the shared cloud account Elena had forgotten to disable on the iPad she left at home. The message from M was brief. "He doesn't look at you the way I do. Leave him tonight." Elena's reply, time-stamped just 20 minutes ago, was what made Julian's chest feel like it had been filled with concrete. "I can't. Not yet. The gala is next week. I need the image. But I'm thinking of you." Julian turned away from the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass. He was a man of structure. He understood loads, tension, and stress points. If a beam was rotting, you didn't paint over it, you replaced it. But marriage was not a building, and the rot here was foundational. The elevator ride down to the garage was silent. He sat in his car for 10 minutes before starting the engine, his hands gripping the leather steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. The urge to drive home, kick open the door, and scream until his throat bled was primal. It was what a normal man would do. It was what a hurt man would do. But Julian was above all a patient man. When he unlocked the front door of their Lincoln Park townhouse, the warmth of the interior hit him, smelling of vanilla and expensive lilies. Elena's signature scent. She was in the living room, legs curled under her on the beige sofa, a glass of Pinot Noir in her hand. She looked up, and her face transformed into a mask of welcoming affection. "You're late," she said softly, smiling that smile that used to stop his heart. "I saved you some risotto." Julian walked into the room. He looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the slight tension in her jaw, the way her phone was placed face down on the coffee table, the performative ease of her posture. She was acting. She was playing the role of the devoted wife while planning her exit strategy, using him for his status, for the image she needed for the gala. A cold clarity washed over him, displacing the rage. If she wanted a performance, he would give her the performance of a lifetime. He loosened his tie, the silk hissing against his collar. He walked over to her, bypassing the chair he usually took, and sat right beside her on the sofa. He saw her muscles tense imperceptibly, a microscopic flinch of guilt she couldn't control. "Sorry," Julian said, his voice steady, devoid of the tremor that was shaking his insides. "Project delays. I was just thinking about us on the drive home." Elena blinked, surprised. "Us?" "Yes." Julian reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers brushed her skin, and he felt the heat of it. It made him sick, but his eyes remained soft. "I feel like I've been distant lately, buried in work. I want to fix that. I want to make sure you know how much I value this." He gestured vaguely to the room, to them. Relief flooded Elena's eyes. It was pathetic how visible it was. She had expected a fight about his lateness, but instead she was getting reassurance. She leaned into his touch, the predator successfully playing the prey. "I know, Julian," she whispered, placing her hand over his. "I love you. We're a team." "A team," he echoed. He leaned in and kissed her forehead. It was the kiss of a man who had already signed the demolition order, but hadn't yet evacuated the building. He would let her believe she was safe. He would let her believe he was the oblivious, doting husband she needed him to be until she was ready to jump. But he would make sure that when she finally jumped, there would be no net to catch her. "Let's have that risotto," Julian said, standing up and offering her his hand. "And then tell me about your day. I want to know everything." He smiled, and for the first time in their marriage, it was a lie. 3 days passed in a suffocating haze of normalcy. Julian went to his firm, corrected drafts, attended meetings, and returned home at 6:30 p.m. sharp. He played the part of the attentive husband with terrifying precision, while Elena unraveled at the seams. He watched her deterioration with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a specimen under glass. She was jumpy. She checked her phone constantly, then hid it. She poured her wine with a shaking hand. Julian knew she was trying to end things with Marcus, to clean the slate before the upcoming gala, but the texts he was still monitoring mirrored her panic. Marcus wasn't letting go easily, and the pressure was cracking her composure. On Thursday evening, the fracture finally happened. Julian was in the den, reading a monograph on brutalist architecture, when Elena appeared in the doorway. She was wearing a silk robe, her face scrubbed clean of makeup, looking younger and infinitely more vulnerable. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "Julian," she said, her voice fracturing on his name. "We need to talk. I can't keep doing this." He marked his page and set the book down slowly. "What is it, Elle?" She walked into the room and sank onto the ottoman at his feet, burying her face in her hands. The sobbing started immediately, heaving ugly sounds that would have once torn him apart. Now they just sounded like noise. "I've done something terrible," she choked out. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "I messed up, Julian. I messed up so bad." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his face a mask of concern. "Tell me." "It was Marcus," she whispered, the name hanging in the air like smoke. It happened once. Just once. Last week. We were working late on the exhibition, and we had drinks, and I don't know. I don't know why I did it. It meant nothing. It was a mistake, a stupid, meaningless mistake." Julian watched her lips move. Once. He knew for a fact it had been going on for 4 months. Meaningless. He knew they had discussed running away to Italy. She was lying to him, even while confessing. She was giving him the acceptable version of her betrayal, a version she thought he might forgive, just to clear her conscience and secure her safety. It was a calculated risk. She was betting on his love being stronger than his pride. "I cut it off," she promised, gripping his hands. Her palms were clammy. "I told him it's over. I chose you, Julian. I choose us. Please say something. Scream at me. Do something." Julian looked at her hands gripping his. This was the pivot point. He could destroy her right now. He could pull out his phone, show her the screenshots, and watch her world disintegrate. He could throw her out into the cold Chicago night. But that would be too easy. That would be a messy divorce where she played the victim of a passionless marriage, and he played the angry cuckold. He didn't want a divorce. He wanted an erasure. He took a deep breath, letting the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. Then he softened his eyes. "Elena," he said quietly. "I'm so sorry," she wept. "I'll do anything." Julian pulled her up from the ottoman and into his lap. She collapsed against his chest, sobbing in relief. He stroked her hair, staring over her shoulder at the dark window. "Shh," he soothed. "It's okay. We're human. We make mistakes." She froze, pulling back to look at him, shock written all over her face. You forgive me?" "I love you," Julian said. It was technically true. He loved the memory of who she used to be. "If you say it's over, I believe you. We can get past this. We have 10 years of history. I'm not throwing that away for one mistake." The relief that washed over her was instant and absolute. She kissed him, desperate and grateful, clinging to him like a drowning woman clinging to a raft. She thought she had survived the storm. She didn't realize she had just climbed aboard a sinking ship. "Thank you," she whispered against his neck. "I'll make it up to you. I promise." "I know you will," Julian replied, his voice flat and calm. He held her tight, his eyes wide open in the dim light, cold and dry. We're going to be better than ever. He had given her the rope. Now he just had to wait for her to hang herself. The following weeks were a masterclass in restoration. To the outside world, Julian and Elena Thorne were experiencing a renaissance. They were seen at the symphony, hands clasped. They were spotted at the corner table of Alinea, sharing a bottle of vintage Cabernet. They were the picture of a couple who had weathered a storm and come out stronger. For Julian, it was exhausting work. Every smile was a calculated structural support, designed to bear the weight of the lie he was constructing. It was a Friday evening in late November, the air outside biting and crisp, when Julian laid the portfolio on the kitchen island. The marble was cool under his fingertips. Elena was chopping vegetables for a stew, a domestic ritual she had taken up recently as part of her penance. She hummed a soft tune, looking lighter than she had in years. The guilt had washed off her, replaced by a radiant gratitude. "What's this?" she asked, wiping her hands on a towel and walking over. "I've been thinking," Julian said, opening the leather portfolio. Inside were sketches, preliminary renderings of a house. Not just any house, but a sprawling, glass and steel sanctuary perched on a cliffside overlooking Lake Michigan. "We've been in this townhouse for 6 years. It has memories. Some good, some we need to leave behind." Elena looked at the sketches, her eyes widening. "Julian, it's the North Shore property I bought last year," he lied smoothly. The land was actually held by a shell company he had set up days after finding the text messages. "I never developed it because I wasn't sure what we wanted, but now I know. I want to build something new. For us. A fortress." He watched her face carefully. He knew exactly what buttons to push. Elena loved status, but more than that, she loved the idea of exclusivity. A custom home designed by her husband, the renowned architect, was the ultimate trophy. It was also the ultimate distraction. "A fresh start," she whispered, tracing the lines of the drawing. "Oh, Julian, it's beautiful." "It will require sacrifice," he said, his voice dropping to a serious, conspiratorial register. "To do this right, to finance the construction without touching the firm's capital, we'd need to liquidate some current joint holdings, simplify our portfolio, put everything into this." He was testing the waters. Ida was asking her to consolidate their liquidity into a project he controlled. Elena didn't even blink. "Whatever we need to do," she said, looking up at him with adoring eyes. "I trust you. You're the visionary." "I want us to renew our vows there," Julian added, throwing the final piece of bait. "When the frame is up, next spring, a small ceremony, just us and the people who matter." Tears welled in her eyes again. She moved around the island and wrapped her arms around his waist, burying her face in his shirt. "I don't deserve you," she muffled against the fabric. Julian held her, staring blankly at the stainless steel refrigerator. His reflection was distorted in the metal, stretched and twisted. "You deserve exactly what's coming, Elena," he said. "What?" She pulled back slightly, not having heard him clearly over the hum of the refrigerator. "I said, you deserve to be happy, Elena," Julian corrected, smiling that perfect, architectured smile. "We both do." He kissed her, tasting the salt of her happy tears. It was working. She was handing him the bricks to wall her in, one by one. She felt safe, loved, and forgiven. She had no idea that the fresh start was actually an eviction notice. "Let's look at the master bedroom plans," he said, guiding her attention back to the paper. "I think you'll like the view." The grand hall of the Museum of Contemporary Art was a cavern of echoes, filled with the hum of polite conversation and the clinking of crystal. It was the kind of event where the champagne was vintage and the smiles were fixed. For Elena, it was a minefield. She had tried to excuse herself from the gala, citing a migraine, but Julian had insisted. "It's important for your image," he had said, adjusting his cufflinks in the mirror. "Besides, we need to show everyone we're stronger than ever." Now, standing under the vaulted glass ceiling, Julian's hand rested possessively on the small of her back. His touch was firm, a constant reminder of the bargain she had struck. He guided her through the crowd, nodding to potential clients, his demeanor relaxed and charming. But Elena was vibrating with tension. She knew he was here. Marcus Vane stood near a display of his own sculptures, jagged, twisted metal forms that looked like they were screaming in silence. He held a drink, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Elena. The flash of recognition and longing on his face was instant. Elena stiffened. She started to turn away, to pull Julian toward the bar, but Julian's hand on her back became an immovable wall. "Look, there's Marcus," Julian said, his voice bright and dangerously loud. "We should go say hello. His installation is the highlight of the evening, isn't it?" "Julian, I don't think—" Elena began, her voice tight. "Nonsense, you're his gallerist. It would be rude not to." Julian steered her forward. It was an act of cruelty so subtle that no one watching would have seen it. He was marching her toward her sin, forcing her to look it in the eye while holding his hand. Marcus straightened as they approached. He looked tired, his suit slightly ill-fitting compared to Julian's tailored perfection. He looked at Elena with a mixture of hope and confusion. "Elena," Marcus said, ignoring Julian entirely for a split second, "I wasn't sure you were coming." "Good evening, Marcus," Julian interjected smoothly, extending a hand. "Congratulations on the piece. It's very visceral." Marcus shook the hand briefly, his eyes darting back to Elena. "Can we talk for a second? About the gallery placement?" It was a code. Elena knew it. He wanted 5 minutes alone to ask why she had ghosted him, why she had blocked his number. Elena felt the heat of Julian's body next to hers. She felt the weight of his forgiveness pressing down on her shoulders. This was the test. She had to pass it. She lifted her chin, her face hardening into a mask of professional indifference. She didn't look at Marcus's eyes. She looked at his tie knot. "Not tonight, Marcus," she said, her voice ice cold. "Julian and I are here to enjoy the evening together. Anything regarding business can be handled by my assistant on Monday." Marcus recoiled as if she had slapped him. "Elena?" "In fact," she continued, her voice rising slightly, performing for the audience of one standing beside her, "I think we're going to take a step back from representing this collection. It doesn't quite fit the direction the gallery is heading anymore." It was a professional death sentence, delivered on a silver platter. Marcus stood there, mouth slightly open, the humiliation flooding his face. He looked at Julian, who was watching the scene with a pleasant, neutral expression, and then back at Elena. He realized finally that the door was closed. "I see," Marcus muttered. "Enjoy your evening." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Elena let out a breath she had been holding for minutes. She turned to Julian, her eyes searching his face for approval. Her hand trembled as she clutched his arm. "Let's go get a drink," she whispered. Julian looked down at her. He didn't feel jealousy. He didn't feel triumph. He felt the cold satisfaction of a mathematician solving an equation. She had just publicly severed her lifeline. She was now isolated, entirely dependent on him. "You handled that beautifully," Julian said, leaning down to kiss her cheek. "I'm so proud of you." He led her toward the bar, stepping over the invisible wreckage of Marcus's career without looking back. The snow had begun to fall in earnest, blanketing Chicago in a heavy, muffled silence. Inside Julian's study, the only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock and the scratch of a fountain pen against thick, cream-colored paper. Julian sat behind his desk, a fortress of dark oak. Elena sat opposite him, her posture submissive, hands folded in her lap. Between them lay a stack of documents, flagged with yellow sticky notes indicating where signatures were required. "It's a standard restructuring," Julian said, his voice low and reassuring, like the hum of a well-oiled machine. "To secure the financing for the cliffside property without liquidating the firm's operating capital, we need to consolidate our personal assets. This moves the deed of the townhouse in your investment portfolio into the new family trust." He pushed the document slightly toward her. "It protects us. If anything happens to the firm, the house is safe. If anything happens to us, the assets are locked." Elena looked at the papers. She was intelligent. She ran a successful gallery. She understood contracts, but the legalese swam before her eyes. The terms irrevocable, sole trustee, and beneficiary restructuring blurred together. Under normal circumstances, she would have sent this to her own lawyer. She would have asked questions. But these were not normal circumstances. This was part of the fresh start. "It seems extensive," Elena said, her voice small. She reached out and touched the corner of the page. So, technically, I wouldn't own the townhouse anymore? It would belong to the trust? We are the trust, Elena, Julian said gently. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, feigning vulnerability. Look, I know it's a lot of paperwork, but after everything, I need to know we are building this on solid ground. I need to know that you're fully invested in this future. In us. He let the silence hang there, heavy with the implication of her infidelity. He was weaponizing her guilt, turning it into a currency she had to spend. If she hesitated, it meant she was keeping one foot out the door. If she signed, she was proving her devotion. Elena looked at him. She saw the man she had hurt, the man who had graciously taken her back, the man building her a dream home on a cliff. She felt a surge of shame for even questioning him. I trust you, she said. It was a mantra she was using to drown out her intuition. I'm all in, Julian. You know that. Then let's make it official, he said, uncapping his Mont Blanc pen and holding it out to her. Elena took the pen. The barrel was warm from his hand. She bent over the desk. Sign here. The townhouse. Sign here. The joint savings. Sign here. Her grandmother's inheritance, which she had foolishly commingled years ago. With every loop of her signature, she was stripping herself of agency. She wasn't just signing financial documents, she was signing a surrender. She was handing him the keys to her cage, believing he was opening the door. Julian watched her hand move. He didn't blink. He observed the ink drying on the page with the same scrutiny he applied to load-bearing calculations. He knew something she didn't. The family trust was structured in a way that gave the primary grantor, him, absolute power to remove beneficiaries. She finished the last page and set the pen down, exhaling a long, shaky breath. She looked up at him with a weak, hopeful smile. Done. We're building the future. Julian gathered the papers into a neat stack. He tapped the edges on the desk to align them, the sound sharp and final like a gavel strike. Yes, Julian said, placing the folder into his drawer and locking it. The click of the lock was loud in the quiet room. We certainly are. He stood up and walked around the desk, kissing the top of her head. Why don't you go pour us some wine? I have one last email to send, and then I'm all yours. As Elena walked out of the room, lighter, believing she had just solidified their marriage, Julian sat back down. He didn't send an email. He simply stared at the locked drawer. The demolition was almost complete. Now he just had to wait for the dust to settle. December arrived in Chicago with a brutal wind that rattled the window panes of the Lincoln Park townhouse. Inside, however, the atmosphere was aggressively warm. The fireplace crackled, the smell of pine and cinnamon hung in the air, and Elena was humming as she adjusted the ornaments on their 12-foot spruce. Julian sat in the leather armchair, a tumbler of scotch resting on his knee. He watched her. She was wearing one of his old cashmere sweaters, the sleeves rolled up, her hair messy in a way that used to make him ache with affection. She looked innocent. That was the problem with liars, Julian thought. They didn't look like villains. They looked like the people you loved. What do you think? Elena asked, stepping back to admire the tree. She turned to him, her face flushed with heat from the fire. Is it too much? I wanted it to be perfect this year, for the new start. It's perfect, Julian said. His voice sounded hollow to his own ears, but she didn't notice. She walked over and sat on the arm of his chair, resting her head against his shoulder. I'm so happy, Julian. I know I broke things, but I feel like we're fixing them. I feel like we're finally us again. She kissed his cheek, soft and lingering, then went upstairs to wrap gifts. Left alone in the flickering light, Julian felt a sudden, sharp crack in his resolve. The exhaustion of maintaining the charade was crushing him. For weeks, he had been the architect of her demise, maneuvering her assets, isolating her from her lover, setting the stage for her total collapse. But looking at her tonight, stripped of her pretense, trying so hard to please him, he felt a wave of nausea. Was it worth it? She had cheated. Yes, but was he any better? He was systematically dismantling a human life. He looked at the scotch in his glass, the amber liquid trembling slightly. Maybe he should just stop. Maybe he should just file for divorce in January, split the assets fairly and walk away. He didn't have to leave her destitute. He didn't have to humiliate her. He stood up, needing a distraction from his own conscience. He walked into his study to check the transfer status of the final trust documents. He woke his computer. The screen glowed blue. He opened the cloud drive where he had been compiling photos for the 10-year anniversary video montage he was planning to show at the party. It was part of the trap, a celebration of a decade of love just before the axe fell. He clicked on a folder labeled Elena, Backup May. He was scrolling through harmless photos of brunch and sunsets when his cursor hovered over a video file. He hadn't watched it before. The timestamp was May 14th, his birthday. He clicked play. The video was short, just 15 seconds. It was shaky, clearly taken by accident, the phone likely propped up against a bottle or a bag. It showed Elena at a restaurant table laughing. Not the polite laugh she gave at fundraisers, but a deep, throaty laugh. Then a hand entered the frame, a man's hand. It reached out and touched her face, his thumb tracing her lower lip. "Stop!" Elena's voice giggled in the video. "He's calling me." "Let it go to voicemail," a male voice, Marcus said. "It's his night, but you're here with me." Elena looked at her ringing phone on the table. The screen in the video lit up with the name Hubby. She looked at it for a second, then reached out and flipped the phone face down. She looked back at Marcus, her eyes shining with adrenaline and lust. "I'm here with you," she said. The video ended. Julian sat in the silence of his study. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He remembered that night. He had sat in this very room, waiting for her until midnight. She had come home claiming her mother had a fall and needed help. He had believed her. He had made her tea. The pity he had felt 10 minutes ago in the living room evaporated instantly, replaced by a cold, crystalline rage. It wasn't just the sex. It was the disrespect. It was the ease with which she had erased him. He wasn't a monster. He was simply the karma she had earned. Julian closed the video file. He opened the folder for the anniversary party preparations. He checked the guest list, the caterer, and the timing for the speech. Every detail had to be precise. He picked up his phone and sent a text to his lawyer. Execute the final transfer on Monday morning. No delays. He turned off the computer and walked back out to the living room to turn off the Christmas tree lights. The room went dark, leaving only the embers in the fireplace, dying slowly in the grate. The crystal chandeliers of the Drake Hotel's Gold Coast room seemed to vibrate with the collective wealth of the 300 guests below. It was New Year's Eve, coinciding perfectly with Julian and Elena's 10th anniversary. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, prime rib, and the peculiar electric hum of high society gossip. Elena was radiant. She wore a floor-length gown of silver silk that clung to her frame like liquid mercury. She moved through the room with the grace of a woman who had conquered her demons. She laughed at jokes, accepted compliments on her glowing appearance, and held Julian's arm with a possessive pride. To her, this night was a victory lap. She had sinned, she had been forgiven, and she had secured her future. Julian stood beside her, a tuxedo-clad statue. He shook hands. He smiled. He accepted the envy of other men. But inside, he felt like a ghost haunting his own life. He watched the room not as a host, but as an observer on the other side of a one-way mirror. At 10 p.m., the jazz band slowed to a hush. Elena stepped up to the microphone, tapping a spoon against her champagne flute. The sharp ting-ting-ting cut through the murmur of the crowd. Silence fell like a velvet curtain. "Thank you all for being here," Elena began, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. She looked out at the sea of faces, friends, clients, rivals, and then turned her gaze to Julian. 10 years is a long time. We've had our fair share of sunny days and, well, we've weathered some storms too. A ripple of knowing nods went through the room. Everyone loves a redemption arc, provided it's vague enough to be polite. But what I've learned, Elena continued, tears glistening in her eyes under the stage lights, is that love isn't about perfection. It's about forgiveness. It's about choosing each other again and again, no matter how hard it gets. Julian, you are my rock. You are the architect of my world. I love you more today than I did 10 years ago. She raised her glass. To us. To us, the crowd echoed, a thunderous chorus of approval. Julian stepped forward. He took the microphone from her. The room waited. This was the moment he could have ended her. One sentence about Marcus, one mention of the video, and she would be a pariah before the clock struck 12. But Julian was playing a longer game. Public humiliation fades. Total erasure lasts forever. He looked at Elena. He looked at the tears on her cheeks. Tears of relief. Tears of a woman who thought she had gotten away with it. To the truth, Julian said, his voice deep and steady. The crowd took it as a profound sentiment. Only Elena blinked, a flicker of confusion crossing her face, but it was gone in an instant as Julian leaned in and kissed her. It was a chaste, final kiss, though she didn't know it yet. The rest of the night was a blur of dancing and champagne. When the countdown to midnight began, confetti rained down like white ash. Julian held Elena as the clock struck 12, signaling the start of a new year. Happy anniversary, she whispered against his ear, flushed with champagne and triumph. We made it. Yes, Julian replied, his eyes open, staring over, her shoulder at the exit sign glowing red in the distance. We made it to the end. They took the town car home in silence. Elena fell asleep on his shoulder, exhausted and content. Julian watched the city lights streak by, the architecture of Chicago standing tall and cold against the winter night. When they arrived at the townhouse, he carried her bags inside. He helped her unzip her dress. He tucked her into bed. He watched her sleep for a long time. She looked peaceful. Then Julian turned and walked out of the bedroom. He didn't go to sleep. He went to the study. He had a flight to catch in 4 hours, and he had one final letter to write. The performance was over. The lights were about to go out. The sun on New Year's Day was blinding, reflecting off the snow-covered streets of Lincoln Park and piercing through the sheer curtains of the master bedroom. Elena woke slowly, a dull throb behind her eyes from the champagne, but a warm contentment in her chest. She rolled over, reaching across the high thread-count sheets for Julian. Her hand met only cool, undisturbed linen. Julian, she crooned, her voice raspy with sleep. Silence. The house was unnaturally quiet. No smell of coffee, no sound of the shower running, no distant hum of the television. She sat up, pushing her hair back. On Julian's pillow there was no indentation of a head. Instead there was a single thick manila envelope. It wasn't sealed. A cold prickle of unease started at the base of her neck. She picked up the envelope. It had her name on it, written in Julian's precise architectural block lettering. She opened it. Inside wasn't a love letter. It was a stack of legal documents, clipped together, and a handwritten note on top. She read the note first. Elena, I saw the texts on the iPad in October. I saw the video from May on your cloud drive last week. I know about Marcus. I know about the meaningless mistake that lasted 4 months. I didn't stay to forgive you. I stayed to ensure that when I left, I wouldn't leave anything behind. The documents you signed last month didn't secure the cliffside property for us. They transferred the title of this townhouse and your liquid assets into a trust for which I am the sole beneficiary. The restructuring was a severance package, Elena, just not for you. You have 30 days to vacate the premises before the property is listed. My lawyers will be in touch regarding the divorce filing. Do not look for me. You wanted a life of secrets. Now it's all yours. Elena dropped the paper. It fluttered to the floor like a dying bird. No, she whispered. No, no, no. She scrambled out of bed, her legs tangling in the sheets. She ran to the closet. His side was empty. The suits, the shoes, the watch box, gone. The precision was terrifying. He hadn't just packed, he had erased himself. She ran downstairs, her bare feet slapping against the cold hardwood. The living room was exactly as they had left it, but it felt sterile, like a model home that no one lived in. She found her phone on the kitchen counter and dialed his number. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. She dialed again and again. No longer in service. She sank onto the kitchen floor, the cold marble biting into her skin. The memories of the last 2 months flooded back. The dinners, the gifts, the dream home sketches, the vow renewal speech she had given just hours ago. It was all a lie. No, she realized with a sickening jolt. It was a design. He hadn't been rebuilding their marriage. He had been constructing a trap. He had let her believe she was safe, let her lower her defenses, let her sign away her leverage, all while smiling that calm, loving smile. He had fed her hope just so he could starve her of it. She looked around the beautiful, empty kitchen. The morning sun streamed in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. She was the mistress of the house, but she owned nothing. She was the wife of a successful man, but she was alone. She had played a game with a man who built skyscrapers, thinking she could hide a crack in the foundation. She didn't realize until the roof caved in that he had been holding the detonator the entire time. Elena pulled her knees to her chest in the empty silence of the house that was no longer hers, and for the first time in her life, she screamed.